Going live. I assume you hit record.
Yeah, a while ago.
Yeah, so we'll just go. It's Monday, December 27th, 2021. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight we are talking about software libraries. So, as many of you know, I do have a car. We really only use it for, like, the rare kinds of trips where there's no other way to get anywhere. And primarily it's just to not have to travel around other people if we have to travel. Like, I'm not taking an Amtrak during COVID times for obvious reasons. But it's not that I didn't expect this, but I guess it'd been so long since I had a car that I had forgotten internally how much of a pain in the ass cars can be.
You don't say. I haven't forgotten.
Yep.
I love everyone. I'm constantly seeing other people suffer under the yoke of their car and laughing at them.
Yep. But
it's a daily occurrence.
But it was a few basic things, like the cars had a few, because it's an older car, you know, it was basically a gift to get through COVID with. And it's older, so it's had a few problems. But it had a bunch of minor problems that all happened at the same time, which actually made diagnosing them difficult, coupled with the fact that cars are different now from the last time I fucked around under the hood of a car. My last car was what? That 98 Sunfire. So,
I mean, my last car was an 06, right? So that was 15 years ago. And I only had the car for like 3 or 4 years. I completely paid it off and sold it to a friend.
My last car was from the last millennium. So
right. But that car that I bought in 06, right, to hook up my iPod / later iPhone to it.
Yeah.
Right. I had to get a special thing that connected to the back of the radio to trick the radio into thinking my iPod / iPhone was actually an external CD changer.
Oh yeah.
Or there wasn't an aux hole, so to get an aux hole, I would have had to replace the entire radio. Right.
Yep.
Or I could have used an FM tuner thing. Right?
Yep, I used to use the FM tuner, but I had to remove the antenna from the outside of my car so it wouldn't pick up the stray radio from the fact that there's a million radio stations near New York.
Like, even, I guess maybe not the cheapest car nowadays, but even really cheap cars today, if you buy a new car, a 2022 2021 model, if you can find one, it's like it's going to have a screen built in and Bluetooth and an aux hole and a USB hole. Like, standard, right?
I mean, this car is a 2012 Chevy. It's got like the basic radio, but even by 2012, it has an aux hole, which is really all I need.
It has a USB hole too.
Yep. It has a USB that doesn't look like it can do anything with that USB except charge stuff. And it has Bluetooth, but get this, the Bluetooth...
The USBs are set up to be like, you know, iPod, iPhone only. There's like a special interface.
This one seems to only just provide like 1.5, like the minimum spec of USB power. It's basically worthless. But the other funny thing about it has Bluetooth, and you can like sync a phone to it. It can't play music. It can only do phone calling. But whatever.
Like they basically just have a Bluetooth headset integrated.
Basically.
They don't have the, you know, because there's all the different Bluetooth protocols, right? So I guess they don't have the A2D, whatever they're using for headphones these days. I forget. Yep.
So of all the things to have, I'm not going to do this whole show in my car show, but it had an oil leak because it's an old car. So I got the gasket on the valve cover rebuilt, and then it still had an oil leak. And get this, you know what failed? The gas cap, or not the gas cap, the oil pan cap, like the cap where you refill oil in. The cap that was brand new from the manufacturer had a defect in the seal and was just spurting oil out, but only when the car was running at high speed. So that was annoying to troubleshoot. It
probably had to do with it probably heated up and then expanded and then spurted.
I got a warranty recall replacement on the cap to my oil. But all of that was mess. So I take the car after I get all that fixed to get an oil change, like just refresh the oil because I had that problem. And then I'm sitting in front of some like Jiffy Lube, and the door opens for me to go in. I go to start my car. Nothing. The battery had died independently of all that.
That's how it goes.
Yeah, original battery. But so the whole reason I'm leading to that story, cars have changed because this car, I think, okay, I will just I'll jump the car, like that's easy. And then I'll drive the car around or idle it just to get the battery charged up. And then I'll go to like some auto parts store and just buy a new battery and put it in. Like I can change a battery with my knowledge of cars, how much has changed in 20 years. So I go and I go and I get a new battery. Like I'm outside an AutoZone and the guy's like, you want me to install it for you? And I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, let's just do it together. Who cares? This is just be easy. We're looking at it and there's this giant, like complicated bus bar thing that's like clamped to the battery, and it's something I'd never seen before. It wasn't just two clamps. It was a bunch of nonsense around the battery.
Yeah.
Yep. So it took about 10 minutes to replace that battery instead of the 1 minute that I expected. And I think I have now solved literally every problem with this car. The last of which...
What about the unbalanced front right tire?
Oh, that's trivial to fix. I just took it in and said, hey, balance my tires for free, and they just did it.
Okay, good.
But the one thing that happened during all of this is the car got an overheat warning. That's a scary warning. But not that like the temperature's high, but like the temperature gets so high that the engine goes into the firing every other cylinder mode to like save on damage to the engine so you can pull over. So I pull over. Car's not that hot. Like they're like I'm under the hood. I thought that. So you know what was causing the sensor to malfunction? The fact that the battery was on its last legs and was over voltage. Replacing the battery fixed that. Fixing the cap fixed the oil thing. The car's now fine. Fucking cars.
Yeah, bicycles don't have that problem.
Yeah, when a bicycle fails, it's very much like, what failed? Oh, look, this exact thing that I can see with my eyes.
It's only 4 parts. There's a gear, a chain, a wheel.
Mountain bikes with full like pneumatic suspensions and pneumatic gear changing could have odd problems, but
the point is a lot, there could always be something, off, right, with a bicycle, but the parts that are required to function so that you can ride it and move are very, very few. If the other parts fail, it's like, I'm moving, right?
Though I must say, a 2012 era car at least still is. Most of the things that can go wrong with it can be fixed by me with my basic knowledge of cars, looking under the hood, looking at YouTube videos, reading the manual.
Well, I mean, yeah, the only time you're going to...
I'm just way slower at it, and I also don't have any way to, like, figure out what's wrong if I can't see a problem. Like, I open the hood, I see oil everywhere, and I'm like, well, I know what the problem is. I don't know what's leaking.
Run into trouble if you have to do anything that is, requires tools you don't have.
Yep, requires lifting the car up.
Yeah, it requires something like opening the transmission, right? Taking it out, putting it back in, or rebuilding it. It's like the same thing with a computer, right? It's like, oh, I can replace my video card, no problem.
But you're not going to fix your video card.
No. Could I replace the transmission? Probably not because of the lifting and all that. Right? But, opening the transmission, that's like fixing the video card itself. It's out of the question. Only a professional can do it.
Yep.
But to the car's credit, right? If you go to like a professional computer repair place, if your video card is broken, they probably can't fix it. But if you go to a transmission expert, someone whose only job is to fix transmissions, like in a recent thing of the day, they actually can. There are people who can open a transmission, take it apart piece by piece, and reassemble it and make it better than it was when it was new. Those people exist. So give a car a credit on repairability there.
Yeah, well, that gets into a broader topic we've brought out off and on how older technology implemented more widely and more reliably and with more care would do more for the world than most bleeding edge technology we have today. Simple, effective systems work.
Well,
the problem with cars is their impact on society at scale.
It's also just, use cases, right? Especially when it comes to something like computer, right? It's like, what's the fundamental difference between a brand new computer today, if you could get one, and a brand new computer 10 years ago? It's pretty much just speed, right? There isn't really any features that are different. So as long as your use case doesn't demand that speed, it's like, what do you need the newer one for? It's like just having one is what's necessary, right? So people who have the lower end use case who don't have a computer, getting them any computer is better than, getting them a fast computer.
Think of people it's easy to forget. There was just an article talking about how powerful old mainframes were. That was a fun read if you haven't seen it. Yep. What do they say? Your computer
phone is like 1,000 mainframes.
If you have a modern laptop, it's like 21 million supercomputers from that era.
Yeah, something like that.
But basically, I forgot where I was going with that. There's big news, so we should probably jump into the news.
Okay, so Amazon Web Services, which runs most of the web pages on the internets and a lot of other things, they had a lot of outages since we last did a Geek Nights episode.
Yeah, like East went down for a while, and then later, like West went down. It's not clear if that was the same reason. It was.
Right, so there's a lot of issues here. One, something we've complained about, I feel like a lot, is that, they have a status page. Amazon is, a lot of companies are bad about this. Amazon's not alone. But they are notoriously and specifically bad about not updating the status page quickly. Everyone knows Oz is down, and you go to that status page, and it's all green lights.
Yep.
2,
or it'll turn to the yellow light of, we might be having an outage.
Right. 2, you eventually, they do update it, and there'll be like a couple yellow lights on a couple items. But it's like, for a fact that is actually, if that was honest, it would be red lights on like a whole set. Items, right? So they don't update it quickly, and they're dishonest when they do update it. I don't know how they've gotten away with it for so long. I don't know why they even bother lying. Is it for SLA reasons? They can lie and say that they met your SLA when they didn't? I mean,
that might literally just be it.
It could just be it. So that's one thing. The second thing is...
Or they have a very pedantic and they have a really, really fiddly definition they use internally to be able to avoid those SLA violations, and that's the logic they use to determine the color of the thing.
Could be, but they're also very not transparent, opaque about the any sort of thing like that.
Which,
there's no explanations.
To their I don't want to say credit.
The reports about what went wrong are severely lacking in detail.
Yeah. Well, but to their, I don't want to say credit, nor do I want to defend them. But for an organization that's so relied upon, they're not going to lose any business by not exposing their own internal problems. They have no incentive to tell anyone shit because nobody's going to migrate off of Amazon.
There's not much choice.
Yeah. What are you going to go use Azure?
Brought up all the same discussions about, is it good idea for all of us to be hosting all our shit in one place?
No.
Right? And the problem is, again, ISPs don't give normal people reliable static IP addresses so that we can't host shit in our homes. So you need to host it somewhere else. And then if you are hosting it somewhere else, right, there are many places to choose from that will host, virtual servers or real servers for you. But if you send real servers that you own to a data center, that's a lot of work for you.
Yep, and a lot of cost.
And a lot of, all right, so you want to use, it's upfront cost. It actually saves you money in the long run if you can do it.
I have found in my career that not to be true because hardware refresh cycles end up actually just costing more just with your own hardware.
It depends on what you're doing, right? The Geek Nights website never needs to refresh the hardware.
Yeah, I mean, we can handle the dozens of hits that we need to handle on a daily basis.
Right. So then it's like, well, if one place hosts everything, that is because of economies of scale, right? That place, if it gets all the money and investment, it can do it better and more efficiently and have lower prices and better service than lots of competitors. And then you get everyone's eggs are all in the same one basket. So Amazon does offer, even if you host everything on Amazon Web Services, they let you, for just about everything, run your services multi-zoned. So they have zones and regions, right? So a region will be like US East, like Virginia. There's a whole region of data centers. And then the zones, which are supposed to be separate parts of the region. So in theory, if one zone goes down, the other zones should be up.
Yep.
So, right.
Unless there's a regional outage, which could happen. Like, they don't even pretend that couldn't happen.
Did happen, right?
Yep.
But you can also do multi-region hosting, right? You can host your service in US West and US East and Asia Pacific, and you can run your servers in multiple locations around the world, and that way, if some of them go down, you're still up because whoever's visiting your service all your users are going to just hit a different region.
Yep. But that can effectively nearly double your cost, but more importantly, it makes a much more complex environment for whatever it is you're running.
Exactly. So it's if you want to do that, you have to pay more money because you're paying for more servers, even if they're like cold, spares or whatever, you're still paying for them. And B, to set that up is difficult. It's not like a one button push, it just works kind of deal.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that really that would actually solve because even these recent Oz outages, US East, US West, anyone who had a multi-region setup was fine because they're they didn't take out all the regions at once. That's never happened, and it probably never will happen.
Yep.
So I really think what they should be focusing on is, regardless of the cause of these problems that have been happening recently, and fixing those. And
yeah, because that's an operational task. That's not a strategic problem.
Yeah, especially the East region, which has most of the problems because it has most of the usage, and also is the oldest region, so it's got a lot of the cruft behind the scenes. The other regions that have been created more recently don't have. But it's like, just make the multi-region thing, for all the different services, more of a push button deal. Even if someone just sets up something real simple, make it so that they can literally push a button and say, look, take my whole account, everything I have running in the account, and just multi-region it, right? Make an exact copy of everything.
It could even be a really naive thing. Like, if you set this up, it will stoneth or like shut down anything you've got going on in the East and spin up replicas from the last good state in the other region.
As long as you're using the Route 53, which is Amazon's DNS server, it should be able to just be like, look, you're running some internet service where people are visiting you via an IP address on DNS. So what we can do is just push button. We'll copy everything in your account to a different region. It'll always be identical to this account. We'll sync the hard drives. Just, whatever data is being stored in your databases will just be synced as much as we can at all times. And if in case of an outage, we'll just move your DNS and turn on those servers and turn off these servers. And then no one needs to configure that. You could just have that automated for any conceivable setup if you copy the person's entire account, right? Every single thing that's in it.
Yep. I suspect partly is I always get this impression Amazon doesn't want to invest in a ton of usability stuff because they can easily force their users to implement that themselves, so they can focus on much simpler core independent services.
Yeah,
like I can see that being a conscious choice,
thing, right? And that they do make a lot of things very usable, right? But you still have to, like, if you want to host things on Amazon Web Services, you need to learn a bunch of Amazon. For each service you use, you need to read documentation and learn how to interact with that service. And how to make
Route 53. If you use it and you only know DNS, and you don't know the specifics of Route 53, you'll be able to make it work, but you'll also probably make some interesting mistakes along the way.
Well, I think the Route 53 one may be a bad example.
Well, that is the simplest one.
It's just DNS, but like RDS, which is host a database, right? So if you know how to administer and host a Postgres database, and you go to Amazon RDS and turn on a Postgres database, it's like, all right, you'll be, okay to start, but it's like, oh, I want to change some settings. Well, you can't really access the configuration file in the file system. The configurations are stored in this other thing, and you've got to learn how to use that thing, and that thing has limits on it that don't exist if you're just running your own server, and you have to learn about those. And then there's all these extra added features on top of it to make life easier. You have to learn how to use those too, because those are not standard.
I suspect another big part of it is the complexity of doing it right. On the inside, if Amazon did it, mostly involves their already very complex private network, and it's probably just not worth the cost. That's the kind of thing I deal with in my own day job. And it is surprising how hard it is to get multiple separate physical regions to interact with each other on a real-time basis.
Yep. Anyway, so that's a thing. But,
It was also really funny to see this outage happen and see all these consumer things go down, and seeing most of capital markets and heavy industry and a lot of government stuff not be affected at all because those industries have been very slow to adopt this technology and adopt these platforms.
Yeah, I just hope that, I think you're seeing now is something that's already been happening, but is probably going to happen more now. Is the other cloud services, Azure and Google Cloud, if people aren't using those, they're basically going to be, instead of just, the multi-region isn't going to be enough for some people who can afford it.
Oh, we're already there. There's companies like Cloudways that just do that for you if you pay them. Exactly. They will be your broker.
Companies that do that, yeah.
Yeah.
Just, people are going to, who really need to be up and can afford it, are going to host their stuff in multiple services all around. And not just multi-regions.
But I guess to your point, a company that needs that level of uptime is going to do that anyway, meaning there's no point in Amazon making it easier for them to do global redundancy on Amazon because they're going to definitely use other competing cloud platforms anyway. That's not the kind of company
My
that's going to trust just
recommendation to
Amazon.
you out there is if you're hosting some internet services is if they're not a big deal, right, then
That's what I was going to get at last. We need to be more tolerant as a society. Like our lives need to be able to weather relatively short outages in electronic systems.
if it's not a big deal, host it wherever you want. It does, it's like even if you're in the same Oz basket as everyone else, it's like, okay, sure,
Yep.
it'll go down, and who cares? It's not a big deal. You just said it's not a big deal. And if it is a big deal, right, don't put all your eggs in the one basket with everyone else's eggs.
Yep, an MMO's login service can have a couple days of downtime during like the big ramp up.
The hospital can't go down.
Exactly.
Even though they do all the time.
So, in the other huge news, there is a massive ongoing vulnerability in so many things that it's hard, like it's actually impossible to catalog them. A lot of IT people, especially security people and operations people, have been having a really bad month. If you're not aware of this, it is the Log4j 0 day.
Right. So basically, if you write a program in Java, one of the things you might want to do is log messages to log files to, wherever, right? And so, Java, in the built-in Java standard library, there is a logging functionality, but it's not that very good, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a lot of features. It's not that fancy. So the Apache Foundation has a project, Log4j. There's actually Log4j 1 and 2.0.
Yep.
That is basically the amazing Swiss Army knife of logging. And it's pretty easy to use and incorporates a lot of people who write code in Java use Log4j. They're just like, import Log4j,
Yep.
start logging stuff. And look at that. I've got all these fancy logging features. And
Yep.
it's really nice. And I include this in all my projects. And major projects, small projects, everyone includes this thing. It's free. It's open source.
Because, you could do all this yourself, but that is not the thing you're writing code to do. That's just the thing you're doing to write the code you're actually trying to write.
We'll talk about that in the main bit, but exactly. So what happened was Log4j was so fancy and so full of features that you could effectively execute, code and log messages that have include little programs in them that get executed and all kinds of right, real fancy stuff you could do, which meant that if somebody could in some way interact with your program to get it to log a message, which is, logging user input is pretty common, right? It's like so-and-so sent us this, log that to the log file, right? Here, an HTTP request came in, put that in the access logs, right? So if you could get someone to log a message with your data in it, you could send data and then get Log4j to execute some code and then take control of their program, their service.
Now think about this. Most people, even if they're writing software, don't think much about libraries, especially a library like this, like something so utilitarian. It's almost
so common and so used so widely and such a big deal that with the backing of a major foundation, right? As a Apache.org projects are usually very trustworthy. So it's like you just trust it implicitly, even if you're just a user and you never get involved. But people always forget every single open source license, pretty much all of them that I know of, they say this is provided without warranty, right? There are no guarantees that this free software is going to work. And if it breaks, there's no one to hold responsible other than yourself. It's open source. You can fix it.
Yeah, but even worse, most people tend to assume that software that doesn't interact directly with fresh user input or the internet or networks isn't as much of a security concern because it's hidden behind walls of all this other stuff. Like, how would anything get there? But logging is literally the kind of thing where you're sending it tons of information from your data, not just from your application itself, but the data your application is processing. User types something weird in an input and it causes a problem. You probably want to write that to a log file somewhere.
Yep. So what happened is because this thing was so widely deployed, this code was on so many surfaces all over the place that were written in Java, every single person who was using this library had to, go and perform updates to their code if their service was online, to just avoid getting completely owned because it was being exploited in the wild, and lots of real important code and real important services, government services, financial services, all kinds of things are written in Java. And they all had to, basically, all these IT people were up, for many, many days, probably still up.
Oh, it's ongoing. It is absolutely ongoing. Log4j is embedded in well, not as surprising, the number of places you might expect based on this conversation up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you were writing a Java, service, it's the odds of you including Log4j are very, very high.
And some of you younger kids might be thinking, well, Java, that's an old person language. It's also the language that's probably the most used in commerce on Earth right now.
Java is a very large, very popular language in the world.
Yeah,
still.
Because it's performant, it's well understood.
A lot of Android apps are, written in Java still.
You know for a fact, if you do stuff in Java, that you can hire from a sea of extremely skilled engineers who all know Java, like deeply and intimately.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like super popular among programmers as like being cool and fun.
Yeah.
But it's widely used by businesses. It is by no means dead. It is supported. It runs. It's a thing.
Yeah. So this is ongoing, and if you do IT or work for a tech company or have a technical, I assume you have a job like that or are interested in one, if you listen to the Monday Geek Nights, and no one has mentioned this at any point in the last few weeks, unless, of course, you've been on vacation the last few weeks, might be worth at least asking someone, like, hey, do we use Log4j anywhere?
Well, no one mentioned it at my work because we don't use any Java.
Yep.
I don't work at some old fuddy-duddy place.
Yeah. I will not speak to this other than in my personal opinion. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about some of the broader ramifications of this kind of thing in the main bit. A couple other quick newses. We'll talk about this more on a Tuesday show, but it's worth noting now that the Quest 2, the VR headset, is outselling Xboxes and PlayStations right now.
It could be that it's because it's actually available, whereas PlayStation,
it's probably not. The PS5 is hard to get, but not impossible. The Xboxes are much easier to get. It seems to be outselling.
The big Xbox, the big black one, is actually very hard to get, just like the PS5 is hard to get. But there's the little Xbox, the little white one that no one wants, and that you can just get one whenever you want one.
Yep. But I think the big thing that's happening here is a lot of kids, because remember, Xboxes and PlayStations, those are the realm of serious hardcore gamers, but the Venn diagram diverges a little bit between what they're into and what PC gamers are into, and like there's all these different ecosystems and demographics that play games. It's mostly young people who are buying VR headsets or getting VR headsets as gift. Like Zennials and younger are the ones who are most interested.
That it's one that doesn't need to be plugged into a computer.
It's only $300. It is like the cheapest console.
It's not a ridiculous price, and it's available. Right? There's actually some software for it to some extent.
Actually, at this point, there are a lot of games kids can play with this. And also, one of the things kids are crazy into is just Minecraft and VR chat and like all these basic things. Right. But remember, this thing is literally cheaper than a Nintendo Switch. And it's a full-featured VR headset. The final
thing is that even if it's outselling them in terms of sales like at the moment, but it's like there aren't more Oculus out there than there are Xboxes out there.
Yeah, right? Give it time.
I don't think it's going to catch up, right?
I think
people, this holiday season, they come in, it's like, well, what do I buy my kid? They already got a Switch. We're in the middle of a console generation here, right? So it's not like you can buy, it's like they got the console already, right? It's like, what are you going to get them? This is the only thing that's new. So, you want to buy an expensive electronic gift for someone that makes sense. It's like one of the only options. It's just
but not only that,
I'm the only thing that you can get for your kid that they don't got already.
So apparently,
it's an expensive electronic gift.
It sold so much during the holiday season that it outsold things like PlayStation or Microsoft Store gift cards, Nintendo gift cards, accessories, and even most games.
Yeah. It didn't outsell the Switch, though. The Switch is the king right now. And so many Switches got sold that the Nintendo eShop was having trouble staying up.
But I guess the news here from a tech standpoint is that
even considering how many people already have Switches, the Switch is still out the king, right?
in terms of technology, the Quest 1 and the Go and all those budget headsets up to this point were really early adopter niche technology. And the Index and like the full featured heavy need to plug them into a 3080 video card VR, that is still the realm of the enthusiast, the hobbyist, the hardcore nerd, and the developer or the experimentalist. But the Quest 2 is really like, this is sort of proving that this is the level of technology that was enough to fully broach the expanded market. Like, this is an expanded market technology. It's not really mass market, partly just because it's still only it's primarily being bought by people who have some money. Arguably, even some consoles aren't really mass market in a traditional sense anymore, considering who buys them.
Well, I think the thing is, it could be one of those things where even if it sells a shit ton, right? Like, and by shit ton, I mean like Nintendo Wii shit ton, is that it could become a thing where actually, maybe the Quest 3 is out now? The Quest 4,
no, this is just the Quest 2.
2, okay.
Quest 2 has been out for a while.
So whatever the next one is, could, eventually get up to Nintendo Wii type numbers, which is about as big as anything gets ever.
Yep.
But I think if you look at the Wii people used it to play a little Wii bowling, and then that was it. Right. It didn't really, there were some games that are on the Wii were big sellers, but it was, it was like this novelty that everyone got and then put away. So it remains to be seen where even if tons and tons of people all buy VR headsets, do they use them when they're new and then put them on the shelf and that's it? Or is it really going to become a thing that someone's using at least weekly? Right. And I don't know about that.
Yep. It definitely seems like it's edging into the latter in terms of game sales.
You show your friends who don't have one. Maybe once in a while a Half-Life Alyx comes out and you play it.
No, but also most of the popular things people do with these headsets, they'll play those games, but it's mostly playing the unlimited like sandbox type games, the social experiences.
There's some people obviously who are using it like wild, right? They use it a lot, but I think the majority of people who have one will use it a whole bunch and then put it away.
So the little bit of data I've seen on that implies that high-end VR headsets have that problem way more than low-end VR headsets.
That makes sense.
It does make
same with board games, right? People buy all the fancy board games and they put them on the shelf.
Yep. Right? What gets played the most, like good old Settlers or
Uno.
Yep.
Uno gets played more than your $50, $100 box of minis.
Yeah. But this is a good sign that this is a significant plateau and milestone of the technology itself. That VR.
They got rid of the Facebook account part, right?
Yep. VR headset technology has hit a consumer milestone that we hadn't really seen before, and that is a mature enough platform that could be used to build very popular long-standing experiences where technology before the Quest 2 was either not there yet or too expensive. All right, I think we can go to the main bit. That's been plenty of newses. I'll skip that Fauci thing. I'll skip that Apple crime thing. There's been I'll save this for another episode. There have been a ton of stalking crimes, verified ones with AirPod or with the Apple tags.
Yeah, I'm sure people are attempting that. Yeah.
Oh, they're succeeding at it. It's becoming a big problem because most people don't have
beep at you if there's one nearby.
No one ever hears the beep. Like there's this whole thing with the police about it. And two, most people have Android phones and they don't even know.
Android phones now can detect the.
Yes, if you install a special app.
Yeah, you should install it.
Most people don't even know that app exists, nor do they even know that these like trackers exist, really. That's the problem. People don't know. And people who have an iPhone and get the warning about they get the warning so commonly that they start to ignore them.
Well, that's a them problem.
Yep. But there's been a lot of like specific cases of this.
I think what Apple should really do is, that warning of there's an AirTag that's not yours that's following you everywhere is so significant that you should really, if it's happening, someone's phone should just be locked except for emergency calls until they address it, right? You shouldn't be able to ignore it.
Yep. But one of the situations where people get them a lot because they commute on the same train. So it's easy to put an AirTag on someone where you have an excuse to be around them nearly every day, because that'll prevent a lot of the warnings from happening because it's still near its owner phone. And people will get those warnings constantly because there's lots of AirTags following them on a regular basis that they don't own.
I've never even seen the warning, and I got AirTags. So.
Yeah. But when was the last time you rode
it had to be a really weird circumstance, like really
Metro North
for you to fall into that exact margin. Like somebody would have to know the tolerance of it and like, try to get near you at the right time. Like, oh shit, it's going to go off. I better get over there.
So it's mostly jilted lovers and domestic violence stuff.
I mean,
All right. Anyway, let's go into it. Put a little marker here. But anyway, things of the day. This is a cute little infographic visualization of fruits by their appearances in Mario games from 1989 to present day.
So they're just counting, like, here was a game with Mario in it. Which fruits appeared at least once in this game?
Exactly. And pineapple was the leader.
Has a one for banana, right?
Yep, but pineapple was the winner for a long time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then grapes caught up until one day in the year
coming in with Mario 2 there.
Around 1995, bananas run away with the game.
Yeah, Mario Kart.
Yep.
There's a lot of Mario Karts.
There are a lot of Mario Karts. I've barely even played the one on the Switch.
Yeah, and Donkey Kong games also have bananas sometimes, And Mario appears in Donkey Kong games.
But the funniest thing about this is it's just a tweet that has like the animation. It's like 45 seconds long that shows this history. But the first reply to it is the Wikipedia article about Luigi's canonical girlfriend. Who only appeared once in the Super Mario Brothers Super Show.
Correct. There's this, like, I guess, I don't know if it's a genre, but this category of YouTube videos that reply to other YouTube videos. Like someone makes one YouTube video and someone else makes like a follow-up, right? And here's a weird situation where I watched a follow-up video and I never saw the original video and I still haven't.
Yeah, you sent me a link to this and I was like, ooh, I really want to watch this. And then I watched like the first 10 seconds of it and I realized that it was responding to a video I had seen.
So you saw the original, but you didn't see this one.
Exactly. So now I'm really curious to watch this one.
The original video, correct me if I'm wrong, is somebody who is, asking the question, what if I had a wire, right? A circuit that was like, a whole...
Like light years long, let's say.
Yeah, right. Like really long. If I turned on the light switch at one end, would there be a, speed of light delay before the light bulb turns on at the other end? And all they did in their video was just sort of figure it out on paper with math. And the answer is yes, obviously. Right?
Yep.
But here in this video, the follow-up video that I did watch, which is the only one I've seen, this person takes a light switch and not an actual light bulb, but instead, a resistor with the scope hooked up to it. Right? And they stretch out some wire, half a kilometer in two different directions, and they flick the switch and look at the oscilloscope recording, and they see, did it take, X amount of time before the electrons made it to the other side? And the answer is yes.
Electrons don't actually make it to the other side, but that's a whole separate...
The other electrons got pushed.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm assuming this video does not get into the physics stuff of how it's actually just a field that is transferring the energy.
Oh, no, he explains all that.
Okay.
He explains everything.
The electrons barely move at all. Like they move slower than you walk.
Well,
literally.
But
literally. The electrons move like maybe a foot an hour.
The point is the resistor, right? There is a speed of light delay, right? It's not magically cheating, right, against the laws of the universe. And here you can see that in experimental reality. And you can also see all the other, little messes in the experiment, how it's not just this perfect jump. And he explains all those things too, of exactly what caused that, and proves it as well. So it's really interesting.
It does look like a fascinating video.
Yeah, so it's always nice to see someone take the, just the numbers and be like, here, let me show you. If someone wants to get an A in high school physics, here's your video.
But also just the act of trying to yourself experimentally verify something, like do it yourself, that is a huge way to interact with and learn about the world much more readily than just learning something from watching a video. Actually try to make it work yourself.
This experiment here with the oscilloscope and the wire had been done in, like old times, like Tesla, Edison times, before we knew all this. Right?
Many of these kinds of experiments were done back then. The science behind this was pretty well understood back then.
I'm just saying, we didn't know about that was pre-Einstein, right? We didn't know everything. So
when was Einstein? When do you think we figured that part out? When do you think we figured out the speed of light? Or more importantly, when did we figure out like electromagnetic fields, which are the real thing? Electrons are just like they're irrelevant compared to the concept of the field.
Yeah. Regardless, really good video with some high school physics action being shown in an experiment that I've never seen, Mr. Wizard do. So
I remember it was in high school physics with one of our labs, like our test.
I didn't do this one.
Yep. But near the end of the year, it was using instruments we had in the classroom, go outside, do whatever you're going to do, and calculate the size of the sun, only using measurements you collect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we were off. I calculated a sun that was about the size of Earth. Someone else calculated one that was bigger than the known universe. We really fucked that one up.
Could I go to the library first and figure out how they did?
Oh yeah, you could know the real answer, but the lab, you only got credit if you came to a result using only.
I could figure out what measurements they used, centuries ago.
Oh, that's what I tried to do. That's why I bring it up, because just like this video, the hard part is not knowing what to do or what to measure. The hard part is knowing how practically to get that measurement. I think of a scene in It's Always Sunny where they're going to sell gas.
Owning an expensive oscilloscope is a good start.
It is a good start. I did not have access to an oscilloscope for that particular exercise.
I don't think an oscilloscope can help measure the size of the sun.
Probably not. I could use that to figure out the speed of light and then use that to make other calculations. Because remember, I could not use any number I did not measure myself.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so in the meta moment, the GeekNights Book Club book, Tale of Genji. I'm Genjiing along. I think we can do this show in January.
Hopefully. It's weird because it's like, you got like 20 something hours left. Guess what? I've been reading basically every day. I still got 20 something hours left. It's like, it's not moving. It's like,
I mean, I got burned by that with the last R. Scott Bakker book where I was like, oh man, I got like 40% of this book to go. There's a lot that could still happen. I turned the page. Here's the 48-page glossary. And then here's the 100-page index. Great.
Oh, maybe that's what's happening. Maybe I am coming up.
Yeah, I don't even know. I feel like we should do the show at the end of January no matter what.
I feel like it doesn't count if I didn't finish the whole.
All right. I'm just saying I expect to be ready well before the end of January, unless I'm making some terrifying error here. But
I hope
we'll
so
see.
also, but we'll see.
Anyway, what I will say is if you are started reading the Tale of Genji and slowed down or petered out like we might have, all I'll say is read it fast like it's a book, and if you were confused, go read like a cliff note or something after you read the chapter to like sort out details, but don't sweat those details otherwise. And 2, treat it like entertainment. Like just what fucking bullshit did Genji get into this week? And you'll find that as the book goes on, after a lull, the drama that Genji gets involved in starts to escalate in scale. And things start to get a little more interesting than just, oh no, he might get caught sleeping with that woman. It's more like, oh no, the emperor might have him executed.
And I got better at reading it. I got more used to reading it, So,
yeah. Anyway, and my last panel from PAX Unplugged, probably the last public appearance I'll do in a long time, is on YouTube with slides as promised. You can just watch it. Pretty happy with that one. Rare Game Mechanics. Can't even speculate on the odds of me or Scott or anything happening at PAX East for us right now. So we'll revisit that topic in a couple months. We'll see how things go.
That'll be a last minute deal, if anything.
Yep, that is definitely a last minute situation.
And, I'm pretty much working on the new website. I worked on it basically all day today, so stuff's going.
I'm working. I was working on day job all day today.
I'm going to have to start working again next week, I guess.
I got to pick a day with our friend to finish Portal 2 co-op, which neither one of us had ever played. We figured, let's just do it. We've been playing it.
Played that when it was new.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It was real good, but what I will say, last thing, get this. We got to the end. I caused an unresolvable glitch, and we had to exit without finishing the last level or nearly the last level, and we have to do that section again now. I got a cube stuck to myself in a way that even death could not unstick it.
Interesting.
It was weird, like super weird, and I can't replicate it.
All right. Well,
anyway,
let's talk about some libraries. Right?
Yeah.
So as we were discussing in the news with the Log4j situation, right? Sometimes you're writing a computer program, you're making some software, right? And maybe the software you're writing is, I don't know, Pong. You want to make a Pong, right? So you want to write code that is related directly to the Pong, right?
Yeah.
Paddles, balls, score, etc., right? But in the course of doing that, you're going to need to write code that also does other things that have nothing to do with Pong, right? It's like, okay, when they push the up button, move the paddle up. Well, there isn't in what programming language, like the C programming language doesn't include did the person press the up button command, right?
Yep.
There's no such thing as that. You need to write software code that will, do USB shit, right? Find gamepads, detect gamepads, figure out which one is player one, figure out if the button was pressed.
Yep.
Right?
Abstract all that stuff away to the point to where your program can say, if button pressed, do X.
Right. And so, you're writing this Pong game, and what are you going to do? Are you going to stop? All you want to do is do Pong. If you have to sit there and write a gamepad controller code in order to write Pong, you're going to be there all fucking day, right? Even if you know how to do that, right? It's like, that's very hard to write. Pong is very easy to write. And so, what we've done is, functions like that, draw something on the screen, or read the game controller, or what's the mouse up to, or play a video, or play a sound, right? All that code is code that a lot of people use in a lot of programs. So, log some text to a log file, right? Log4j. We write that code once, someone out there writes it, and then everyone else just uses it.
Yep.
Right? We say, oh, someone else out there already wrote gamepad handling code. I'm just going to get their code and use it. And
now, in some ways, you already, even in the earliest days of computing, you would kind of do this on your own. Like, you'd write a function that did a thing, then you might reuse that function. You might give that function to someone else.
Paste it into all your other programs because you just kept using it. Yeah.
Yep. So it's basically like that, just scaling up and scaling up of what parts of coding are interesting to you or intrinsic to what you're doing, and what parts of coding are a problem someone else has solved probably better than you would if you did it on your own.
Yeah, even something simple like what's the square root of a number, right? It's like you can't just do that. It's not like division where the CPU has a division instruction. Well, some of them do.
Yeah. Let's not get into that. But
yeah, let's not get into that.
But yeah, to write the code that'll do that, you're going to have to basically do a mathematical proof.
Yeah, and it's like someone else already did it, and not only did they already do it, they already did it in the best, fastest, most reliable possible way that it can be done.
Yep.
So even if you wrote that code, you would do a worse job of it. Just import their code and use it.
What I just say, like earlier this year, there was this news story about someone discovered a faster algorithm to do multiplication of numbers with a lot of digits. It wasn't a human intuitive way. It was like this weird nonsense, but it's just faster, like materially faster.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So some of these functions get included in what's known as the standard library. So most programming languages have a standard library, which is when you start coding in that language, all of these functions are just sort of already there, available for you to import them. So if you write in Python, right, you could do import math.square root, and just go to town. You don't need to install anything.
Yep.
Right? It's just there. It's included in Python. Batteries included, right? If you're writing in C, I guess the standard library doesn't technically have to be there, but it's gonna be there. You can include, stdio.h and start doing printf, right? That's gonna work on basically any computer that you find. That's gonna be installed already, right? But sometimes log4j, it's not gonna be there. You got to go out and get it from somewhere.
You know what the sturdy writes some code? Import X from Y. It's going to be some flavor of that in many cases.
Yeah, well, you got to download it first, right? So, now back in the day, and this is kind of like the crux, right? Back in the day, pretty much all the programming languages, most of them were compiled languages, and today there's still a lot of compiled languages, right? And when you compile code, you write some source code, some text, and you run the compiler, and it generates an executable file, a .exe or a whatever it is, depending on your computer, right? An ELF binary on Linux or whatever. And then that's what you actually run. So anything that you're going to use as from a library, you have two options. Number one is you can do what's known as static linking, right? Where all the code from those libraries is actually getting included in your exe. So you get this giant exe at the end that includes all the stuff you imported and your code all in this one big exe file. And that's good and bad, right? So why is it good? It's good because that exe will pretty much just run on almost any computer. You just run it.
Yep, just copy it to some random location. It is self-contained. You
can just copy it to someone else's computer, run it. It's going to work, right? So that's really nice. Bad, it's kind of big, right? It's a lot of hard drive space, especially, nowadays, hard drive space, no one cares. But back in the day, that was a big deal, right? If you couldn't statically link everything, you'd run out of hard drive space because you'd basically be copying. Every single program would have the same exact code included in its exe file, just wasting space with duplicate data all over the place, right? That's not great. Also not great. Let's say that you use something like, I don't know, log4j, right? And you need to update log4j. If it's included in your exe file, now you have to recompile your whole program with the new log4j, right? And then just give everyone a new exe file to replace the old one. That's a pain in the ass. So the solution for that is something they came up with called dynamic linking. So this is, you've seen on Windows DLL files.
Yep, right? Dynamically linked library.
Yeah, something like that, right?
Trying to think back to my old wine days. I used to be a wine expert.
Same thing. Think about like DirectX or, Microsoft Visual C++ redistributable, right? Yep. It's like these libraries, you just install them on your computer on their own. They're just installed, you have them, and then you get an exe. The exe doesn't include the libraries, but it does know how to find them on your computer and then load them and use them when you run the program. So you can have several different programs that all do log4j stuff, right?
Yep.
But you've only got one copy of log4j on your computer, one copy of DirectX 12 on your computer, and all those games are using those same DirectX files, right? And when you run a game, it loads the files into memory. When you run a different game, it loads the same files into memory. They're all sharing. You're saving hard drive space, and you can update DirectX. And now every game has a newer updated DirectX because they're all using the one that's installed.
Now, before you say, but what if I have an application that was written where it can't use there's some incompatibility with a new version of the library?
That happens. That's a bad thing.
It happens all the time. There's a lot of ways around that. Linking can be really complex. You could have executables that will look for one version of a library, but can fall back gracefully to older versions of a library. Mm-hmm. You have some that will prefer a particular version of a library, but degrade gracefully if that version isn't available. You'll have things that just won't work. Some applications, this is less common now, I feel like, than it used to be. If you don't have the exact right library available, it'll just fail, sometimes in interesting ways.
Yeah, I mean, you look around and it's like, if your program was written in such a way irresponsibly, maybe using the library in ways that the people who make the library didn't intend.
Yep.
And then the people who make the library change something, and they're like, well, anyone who's using our library properly and not doing anything we didn't tell them not to do or any undocumented stuff, it's still, even this updated library will still work with their old program, but they wrote their program irresponsibly and now it's broken by the new library version. Also, you get irresponsible people who work on libraries. They put a new version of their library and that new version breaks every program that ever used that library.
Yep.
Right?
That's why like Linux distros in their package managers, which we've talked about in old Geek Nights, they tend to have like the official version or versions of commonly used libraries that they trust, and that'll usually be a little bit behind whatever's out in the wild.
Well, they're also usually, recompiling and pre-compiling everything to like work together with like a known set, right?
That's why so many problems trying to like compile something that wasn't in that repository against libraries you got from that repository. That you get into weird situations when you're going down that road.
Well, you'll always hear Linus Torvalds, the Linux kernel. It's not a Linux kernel isn't a library per se. It's like as system call APIs and whatnot. But he'll always say, "Don't break user space," which means if someone has a program that they wrote that's a Linux program, you shouldn't change the Linux kernel in any way that will cause Linux programs that someone wrote for an old kernel to not work properly anymore.
Yep.
Right? Don't break user space. So he's basically acting as I guess. Effectively maintaining a library, at least an API, because a library is just an API sort of, and making sure he doesn't break any of the programs that are linking to his, kernel, right? So you got the static and you got the dynamic. You got a third problem, right? Is that you have interpreted languages. So an interpreted programming language is one like, Python or Perl or Bash or, BASIC, right? Where you don't compile the code into an exe. All you do is you have an exe like python.exe or qbasic.exe, right? Or perl.exe. And then you say, hey, python.exe, and it says, yeah, what? You say, open that Python file, and it's a text file with code in it, right? That is still just text. And that exe looks at the text and just reads it in and starts running it immediately, right? That's how come you can go to your command line and type Python and then just start typing Python code. And when you press enter, it runs immediately. It doesn't compile. It just runs it. It's because the exe is running and reading in, right, lines of code and then executing them as soon as you press enter. So if you have libraries for an interpreted language, what do those libraries look like? They're just more source code files. Right? Yeah. You're literally just downloading more and more source code, someone else's code that someone else wrote. And then you tell your program to include that source code so that when the exe comes along and reads your program, and the first line in your program is import this other program, it goes and it looks and it finds those other text files with source code in them and reads those first. And then it starts reading your program with all those existing library functions already in memory. And now your program can use those functions because they've already been interpreted. And they get reinterpreted every time you run your program. But anyone who wants to run your program has to have all of that source code on their computer, along with the source code to your program on their computer. And the interpreter for the language has to be able to find all of those source code files wherever they are. They have to find them somewhere. And they have to all be matching correct versions that go well together. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Same deal. So you don't have to worry about static or dynamic because it's sort of, I guess you could, have the source code installed once and have a bunch of different programs that all use it. You could also include, when you give someone your program, you could include even more files with it. You could be like, yeah, by the way, my program also comes with even more files. And that way the interpreter won't have to look around the computer to find some shared version.
So
it'll always...
There is even an entire Wikipedia hit page dedicated specifically and solely to Microsoft Windows DLL hell.
Yep.
Because how libraries get used and like what it actually looks like practically varies widely depending on what you're looking at. Like operating systems can have DLLs can have libraries, code can have libraries, anything can have libraries. Libraries can take different forms depending on what languages you're using. Executables can basically act like libraries. This is a very, very broad space.
Yep. But yeah, it's just, I think it's something that, only programmers have this like at the forefront of their mind. Like if you're coding modern software in the year 2022, right? Or 2021, soon to be 2022.
Yeah.
It's like everything you do is basically when you have a problem, you don't code a solution. You find a library, you learn how to use the library, and then you use it. And you're really just gluing libraries together because almost all the code to do basic stuff in the world has almost all already been written, right? It's not like you're going to do better unless you're doing something that's brand new. You're not going to do better, right? So if you need to write a program that talks to a Postgres database, there's already Postgres client libraries. Use them. Right?
Yep.
You want to do some encryption? There's already OpenSSL and other encryption libraries. Use them, right? If you want to do some encrypted database stuff, well, you just write a program that uses both of those libraries and glues them together. That's all you do as a software engineer in the present day, if you have a job, is find libraries, learn them, and glue them together, right?
Now,
you don't do a lot of writing new code unless you are maintaining a library or truly in some space that is completely unexplored, making some brand new hardware.
Now that middle bit there, learning them, a problem that is becoming more and more common as we abstract things out. Remember way back there was that issue. It was a function in Node. Didn't it like check if a digit was even? Like it was some trivial function that came from a library that came along with like a gigabyte of dependencies and malware. And that is, if you don't know what a library does, or you get it from a shady source, that can cause extreme problems for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to try to milk another episode out of this and talk about those issues.
Yep,
there.
exactly. But it's worth noting that this has been a pernicious problem throughout all of computing, but it's taken on different forms. Like the DLL hell of an old Windows system doesn't really happen anymore because the operating system got more advanced, has more capabilities around knowing what libraries to use when. The Windows registry? That was created to solve part of that problem. As much as people complain about the Windows registry now, I don't think many of you were alive when Windows didn't really have a registry the way we see it today.
Nope.
Like you'd install some program and it would literally just install an old version of some random library and break everything else on your computer. We're kind of past that.
You install, you install Windows, 98. Right?
Yep.
And then you install Cool Program 1, and Cool Program 1 comes with library version 1. And then you install Cool Program 2, which it may be Photoshop. You install Photoshop, and it has library version 2, and they're two DLLs with the same name that go in the same place. So whatever program got installed most recently has its library file there. And if both of those programs don't work with the same library version, then only the one that you installed most recently is going to work properly because it overwrote all those files with its versions. Right? And there wasn't a system in place to have multiple versions of the library side by side such that each program would load the version that it goes with. And if two programs happen to use the same version, okay, good, they can share the same version. But otherwise, so that is a problem that has been solved somewhat, not completely,
Yep. Well,
but that you're not going to encounter any problems with it in normal everyday life.
The place I've encountered it the most in like modern times, like skipping any old worthless anecdote, tends to be around indie PC games from about a decade ago with different C# and C like redistributable libraries. And more recently, even in Steam games, sometimes there'll be minor problems with that, especially if you're running early builds and early access. You'll get like a weird Windows, Microsoft, something redistributable error, and you'll have to futz around to fix that. But that's about the extent of where I encounter that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see the opposite situation, right, more of the static linking kind of deal, go look at old DOS games, right? You install an old DOS game, and it's like, hey, choose your sound card, right? Because the game is including some, sound card, drivers that they're included with the game, not with DOS, right? And whoever made that game went out and got, Sound Blaster 16 libraries and included them with their game on the CD-ROM or on the floppy disks. And each game has its own copy of some code that knows how to talk to a Sound Blaster 16. And you've got that installed on DOS several different times, once for each game. And each game has to know the IRQ of your sound card separately. Whereas if you have DirectX, it's like, well, you just have directsound.dll and all the different games load that library and talk to it. And they don't have to know any of that nonsense because your operating system knows it. And the one library takes care of it, and you can, everyone writes it the same way.
Yep. Now, the other thing that's interesting that's happening with more modern software development practices, especially with the containerization of code, and we've increasingly got to the point to where we can deploy environments at scale, in bulk, en masse, and independently if we want. So increasingly, you can deploy like a Docker image or like some sort of environment that has all of the libraries you want to use, even if they're dynamically linked, so that that environment can, as a whole, be tested, certified, deployed, maintained independently of even other instances of that same environment.
Yeah, so this is sort of a, plus and minus kind of deal, right? I think we did a show on containers, but what you can do with the main thing, I guess, you can do with a container is, virtually speaking, you take an entire operating system, right? A whole system with all the software already installed, right? The libraries, the programs, everything. And then you bundle it up sort of like zip, right? You're hiding the fact that it's actually a crap ton of files.
Yep.
And you make it appear as if it's an exe, even though it's not, right? It's a whole system, and you're basically taking that whole system and you're running a single command in that system, and externally, it looks like a box that runs one command. It looks like an exe.
Yep.
So you inside that box are libraries. So now that box will never fail because it always includes the versions of the libraries it needs to run the one thing it runs, which is good. But that means it's going to work everywhere, just like the statically linked library, deal. But the problem there is it's like, well, what's the point of the dynamic linking now, right? It's like, if I have an update to a library and I've got 10 containers that all use different versions of that library, I can't update all 10 of them, right? That because I'd have to go around to the code that builds each of those containers and rebuild them all to use newer versions of Log4j or whatever.
You can almost it'll save you operational and troubleshooting time. It'll make it easier to resolve problems and avoid problems. But like Scott pointed out, it'll also cause more pain in the ass and annoyance when you're building new things, upgrading things, changing things.
Yeah, if you just had 10 different programs installed on a computer and that had one installation of a library, you could just update that library. And now if all those programs are written properly, they're just suddenly going to work.
Yep.
Right? Whereas if they're all in containers, you now have to rebuild all those containers and go and work on each of those projects to get each of them updated individually. And that could all, there's a downside and an upside, right? It's like if you had them all installed outside containers and you updated the library globally, and now maybe 2 of those programs break, right? Because they weren't they weren't written properly, or the version, something changed, you don't know, right? Whereas the containers are never going to break because you don't put one out there unless it is working within itself, and it's going to work exactly the same way. No matter what computer you deploy it on, Mac, Windows, Linux, old busted rusty, phone, flip phone, whatever, because it's the exact same bundle of stuff. It runs exactly the same everywhere.
Yep. And I'm thinking back in terms, the last time I really cared about this was when I was writing Python code, because I haven't done that much lately, but sort of pre-Docker, where I'd have multiple Python environments while I'm playing with different tutorials and things. Doesn't really matter to my life anymore. It mattered a lot when I was trying to make Windows applications work on Linux via Wine. And there was mostly the game of run the application, dig through logs to figure out what failed, copy, I'm making quotes, a DLL that is not redistributable and is proprietary from, say, a Windows box I had handy, put it into a place and see if that solved the problem, and then repeat.
Yep.
But in terms of using libraries and writing code, it really won't matter. The one thing I think that a lot of beginner programmers will run into is primarily the fact that there might be 10 different math libraries and you're not sure which one to use.
Yep.
Probably doesn't matter if you're at the
It
stage
often
where you
does.
don't know, well, I'm saying if you're at the stage where you don't know, I guess you can either use the library that's referenced in the tutorials you're doing, or like you see people using the most, or use the one. I'd say don't err on the side of using the library that seems like it does the most, unless you have a good reason to.
Usually you're going to want to A, stick to the standard library, the one that's included with the language, if it possible. B, find a library that is very popular and people use a lot and is still being worked on. It's not something that's dead and has been sitting there.
Yeah,
for
like
10 years.
Log4j. Lots of people work on that. Nothing could go wrong with Log4j.
I'm just saying, it's still a better choice than something.
Oh, it's
that's
better
sitting around
choice than
GitHub.
Joey Jojo Shabadoo's logger.foo that's 4 gigabytes and is only used by one project.
Right, and it hasn't had an update in 10 years.
Yep.
And it's probably not going to work out for you, right? But yeah, it's also, I think, all this library thing, it kind of makes, learning to program sort of a disappointment in a lot of ways. Because, back in the day, you'd learn to program. And then when you went to go and program things, it was just like what you learned, right? You
Yep,
had to
I'd
write
make a
all
bunch
these
of data
algorithms.
structures with like nested loops to solve a problem. Nowadays, it's like import this Python library, run one function on the data set, and I'm done.
You go to do something like Advent of Code or other programming competitions, and like those remind you what you liked about programming, solving these fundamental, computing problems, right? On not necessarily a low level, like machine code level, but an algorithmic level. But the actual work of software engineering these days isn't done in the grand scheme, but all the foundational work is done, right? You never had to, pour a foundation ever again. All you do is put a house on top of a foundation. That's it. And it's a completely different exercise, mentally speaking, to, glue functions together than it is to, build algorithms and data structures, from nothing. And so I think, even though we classify both those activities as programming, if you have fun doing one, you might not enjoy doing the other. I certainly enjoy doing one more than the other. And I think this is a large problem just in the grand scheme of, programming culture, is like, the enjoyable hobby thing is not the useful thing. So you go out and get your job doing programming, and all you're doing is gluing libraries together, and it's not what you had.
But I think it even starts to hurt the, not like professional training materials, but like if you're looking for help on a problem, a lot of tutorials and advice boil down to, here is the copy paste of this library that's basically a black box to you. Or you'll write a program that effectively just calls 4 different libraries in order without necessarily understanding the nuance of what those libraries are doing. Not saying that's bad, but I'm saying that makes it easier to avoid learning fundamentals that will give you a huge advantage in terms of writing good code down the road.
Yeah. And the final problem there is that the education we have for, you go to get a computer science degree, at least when I got one, I'm pretty sure this is still the case.
Gonna optimize that bubble sort.
Right. They're not teaching you to glue libraries together, but even though that's what you're going to be doing at your job, right, most likely, they're teaching you the more fundamental parts that you're probably not going to do at your job, depending on what your job is.
Yeah.
And
well, this is why computer science and computer engineering and software engineering are 3 basically completely different fields.
But you get people who are trained into a place where they learn some fundamental algorithms and things like that, but they got out of practice. They don't actually do them, right? And they've only ever done them in such a way as to solve problems directly, like Advent of Code style, right? Mm-hmm. And then they go and they work and they didn't learn how to glue libraries together. They figure that out because it's not as hard, right? If you can do one, you can learn the other. But to learn to make a library when one is needed to be made, right? It's like, that's not taught so much, right? You have, and the people who can do that and do that well, write code that's good enough and solid enough that everyone else in the world can import and use your code in their programs, right? That's what makes you like the next level, S tier software, programmer. And they don't teach that, right? It's like you gotta, know both sides, because you have to make something that is on the fundamental side has to be really, really solid, secure, performant, does things the best possible way, right? On the side no one looks at. And on the front side, right, it's like people are going to be taking your code and gluing it to other code. You need to make your interface, your API, well designed such that it is nice to glue with. Right?
Yep, that's a big thing
for anyone to use.
In my day job, a big part of my life is considering the UX, the user experience design of APIs. Specifically, they have a UX
right
just like a video game has a UX, just like a web page has a UX. An API has a UX. A library has a UX.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you weren't thinking about software libraries, that's pretty much all programmers think about. And, if you only use software, it's something you should think about a lot, because your computer's probably has more libraries installed on it than programs.
Yep. And
there's more libraries installed on it in programs.
And if you find you're trying to solve a problem with your computer by deleting or renaming or moving library files around, that's like trying to fix the problem I had with my car.
2021/2. Don't do that.
Yep. That would be like if I was trying to fix the problems I described at the start of the show with my car by rooting around in the transmission with a screwdriver and starting there.
Yeah, don't do that.